before the rise of mighty kingdoms, before the pyramids cast their shadows across the desert, before the first empires carved their victories into stone. The world was ruled by silence, mystery, and a darkness that swallowed entire civilizations whole. Yet from that darkness, one people emerged, a people whose story was so unlikely, so impossible, that historians still struggle to fully explain their survival. This is the story of the Israelites, a story buried beneath millennia of dust, politics, exile, and forgotten scrolls. A story older than the temples of Egypt, older than the myths of Greece, older than most of recorded history. And the truth behind their origin is far more mysterious than most people realize. Their story does not begin with a king, not with a warrior, not with a prophet. It begins with a wanderer, a solitary man standing beneath a sky overflowing with stars, and a voice that shattered the silence of the ancient world. His name was Abram. The world he lived in was filled with gods carved from stone, priests who watched the stars for omens, and cities rising like giants along the rivers of Mesopotamia. Yet none of those gods spoke to him. None of those kings knew his name. He was just a man tending flocks on the edges of an ancient civilization. But destiny often hides in the small, forgotten places of the earth. One night, a night recorded in some of the oldest religious and historical writings, Abram felt something calling him. Not a voice of thunder, not the whisper of wind, but something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of the universe itself. It said, "Leave your land, leave your father's house, go to a place I will show you." A simple command, but one that would reshape the world. Most men spend their lives searching for stability, a home, safety, familiarity. Abram did the opposite. He walked away from everything he knew. He left Ur, the great city of moon worshippers. He abandoned the temples that towered over the plains. He stepped into the desert with nothing but faith, and the ancient promise that his life meant something far greater than he understood. As he crossed burning sands and stony hills, he carried a question no one could answer. Why him? Why choose a simple shepherd for a destiny written in the stars? Long before the Israelites had a name, before they had laws, kings, or a homeland, they had a calling, a destiny, a promise. And that promise would take Abram to a land that would one day be known as Israel, a land surrounded by giants, kingdoms, and ancient deities now lost to time. Yet the mystery deepens here. Archaeologists now know that Mesopotamia during Abram's time was filled with advanced skywatchers, priests who charted constellations, tracked eclipses, and believed destinies were written in the heavens. But Abram's destiny did not come from the stars. It came from the one who made them, and that is where the story transforms from history to something far more powerful. For it was on this journey that Abram received a covenant, a promise sealed not with ink or stone, but with fire, a covenant that his descendants would become a great nation, a people who would carry a purpose no empire could erase, a lineage that would survive every exile, every invasion, every attempt to destroy them. This covenant, mysterious, ancient, and unbreakable, is the hidden truth behind why the Israelites endured when so many other ancient civilizations vanished. Abram's name would later become Abraham, and his descendants would grow into 12 tribes. 12 tribes that would one day stand against empires, cross deserts, build kingdoms, and witness miracles the ancient world could not explain. But before all of that, before Egypt, before Moses, before kings, before temples, there was only a man, a voice, and a promise. This is where the hidden truth begins. And as we journey deeper into their story, you will see that nothing, not their survival, not their rise, not their destiny, was accidental. Everything was connected. Everything was guided. Everything was part of an ancient design. Now the journey continues. From a wandering man under the stars, to the birth of a nation that would change history forever. The deeper you go into the ancient story of the Israelites, the more you realize something remarkable. Their entire identity did not begin with a king, a kingdom, or a homeland, but with a covenant. A covenant unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Covenants in ancient times were common. Agreements between kings, treaties between tribes, contracts scratched onto clay tablets. But this covenant was different. This one was not initiated by a king, or a priest, or even Abraham himself. It began with the same unseen presence that called him out of Ur. Historians often debate this moment. Some call it myth. Some call it legend. Some say it was a spiritual experience recorded in symbolic language. But whatever it was, it became the foundation of one of the longest surviving peoples on earth. Abraham stood in the quiet of night, surrounded by silence so deep it felt ancient. The desert air was cold, the stars bright enough to cast faint shadows across the sands. This is when the vision came. Ancient writings describe a moment where Abraham prepared a ritual, cutting sacrificial animals in halves and laying them opposite one another, forming a path between them. At first glance, this seems mysterious. But to the ancient world, this was symbolic. It represented an unbreakable pact, a promise that if either party broke the covenant, their fate would be like the pieces on the ground. But then something extraordinary happened. Abraham did not walk between the pieces. He fell into a deep, overwhelming sleep, a trance-like state the ancient texts describe as great darkness. It was then that something else moved through the pieces. Something glowing, something burning with power, a flame, a smoking vessel, a presence, a sign that this covenant did not depend on Abraham at all. It depended on the one who made the promise. And what was the promise? It was not simply land, or children, or blessing. It was identity. You will become a great nation. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That single statement is one of the most profound declarations in ancient history. It meant that Abraham's descendants would not be an average people. They would carry something, a purpose, a role, a destiny that would have global impact. Yet the promise seemed impossible. Abraham was old. Sarah was old. They had no children. Everything about their circumstances contradicted the promise. But this is where the hidden truth lies. From impossible conditions comes an unbreakable destiny. Generations later, this covenant would shape kings, prophets, warriors, and nations. It would influence law codes, languages, cultures, and civilizations. It would lead to temples, exiles, returns, revelations, and sacred texts read by billions. And it all began with an elderly couple staring up at a sky full of promises. When Abraham told Sarah about the covenant, she laughed, not out of disrespect, but because she could not imagine the impossible. But destiny does not depend on human possibility. It depends on the purpose behind the covenant. In time, a son was born, Isaac, the child of promise, and the covenant passed to him. Then Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. The covenant passed not to the strongest, not to the oldest, but to Jacob, a man whose life was shaped by struggle. Jacob wrestled with his identity. He wrestled with fear. He wrestled with his destiny. And in one of the most mysterious events in ancient writings, he wrestled with a divine messenger in the night. That struggle changed him. It changed his name, and it changed the course of history. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. From one man, a nation was born, not from victory, but from struggle and endurance. Jacob had 12 sons. These 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel, each with its own symbol, story, land, and destiny. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. Together, they formed the foundation of the Israelite identity, a people whose story would cross deserts, kingdoms, and centuries. A people who would shape the ancient world in ways historians still uncover today. A people bound not by borders or empires, but by a covenant first spoken in the darkness of the ancient desert. And now, their story moves toward the land of Egypt, where their identity will be tested, reshaped, and transformed in ways they never imagined. The covenant was only the beginning. The next chapter would define them as a nation. The covenant had been passed down from Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, and now to the 12 tribes. But destiny never unfolds in the way people expect. A severe famine swept across the land, crippling entire regions. Crops died, animals perished, families wandered through barren fields searching for food. Even the promise-bearing tribes of Israel were not spared. So Jacob, the father of the tribes, made a decision that would change the direction of their entire history. They would travel to Egypt. Egypt, the land of abundance. When every surrounding nation was starving. Egypt, the land of order, gold, temples, and the Nile. Egypt, the heart of the world's greatest civilization at the time. But the Israelites did not travel there as strangers. One of Jacob's sons, Joseph, had already risen to power in Egypt. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, Joseph endured betrayal, imprisonment, and abandonment, but rose to become one of the most powerful officials in the Egyptian empire. Egypt did not save Israel by accident. Joseph was part of the design, a design that began generations before he was even born. When the Israelite caravan entered Egypt, they were overwhelmed by what they saw. Towering pyramids casting enormous shadows across the sands. Massive temples guarded by stone colossi, the Nile flowing like a river of life through the center of the empire. Scribes, priests, merchants, soldiers, thousands moving like an organized machine. To a wandering people who lived in tents. Egypt was another world. Joseph welcomed them with open arms. He wept as he embraced his father Jacob. He forgave his brothers who sold him, and he secured land for them in Goshen, a fertile region perfect for raising flocks. For the first time in generations, the Israelites found rest, safety, food, shelter, growth, and they grew. The Israelites multiplied at a pace that startled Egypt's rulers. From a single family, they became thousands, then tens of thousands, then a population so large that the Egyptians began to fear them. Their identity remained strong. Their traditions remained unbroken. They taught their children about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They honored their lineage. They preserved the covenant. But Egyptian rulers changed. The Pharaoh who knew Joseph died. And the new Pharaoh looked at the Israelites not as guests, but as a threat. What if they join our enemies? What if they grow stronger than us? What if they rise against us? Fear transformed hospitality into oppression. Taskmasters were assigned to control them. Forced labor was introduced. Fields, cities, monuments. The Israelites were ordered to build under brutal conditions. Generations born in Egypt grew up under the shadow of slavery. Yet here lies one of the greatest mysteries of their survival. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. The more pressure Egypt applied, the stronger the Israelites became. Empires rise through power, but the Israelites rose through endurance. Their identity, shaped by the covenant, was stronger than the chains on their hands. And their endurance set the stage for one of the most extraordinary transitions in ancient history. Because in the darkest period of their Egyptian captivity, a child was born who would alter the destiny of nations. A child who would challenge Pharaoh. A child who would lead the Israelites out of slavery. A child whose name would echo across time. Moses. His birth was not a coincidence. His rescue from the Nile was not luck. His survival inside the very palace that oppressed his people was not chance. Moses was part of the ancient design, a continuation of the covenant that began with Abraham. Egypt shaped the Israelites. Egypt strengthened them. Egypt prepared them. But Egypt could not contain them. And the hidden truth behind their journey was only beginning to unfold. At the heart of every great civilization lies a story of a child whose destiny changes everything. For Egypt, that child was Moses, a child who did not belong to them, yet would one day challenge the very throne of their empire. His story began in fear. The Israelites had grown too numerous, too strong, too united for Pharaoh's comfort. And so he issued a decree that chilled the ancient world. Every male child born to the Israelites must be thrown into the Nile, a sentence designed to crush a nation's future. Yet from this darkness, destiny rose. A Hebrew mother gave birth to a son she knew she could not hide forever. So she did the unthinkable. She crafted a basket from reeds, coated it with tar, and placed her child upon the waters of the Nile, not to abandon him, but to release him into the hands of destiny. This child drifted toward a future no one could have predicted. The basket floated into the marshy edges of the river, toward the gardens of Pharaoh's palace. There, among the tall reeds and still water, The daughter of Pharaoh found the crying infant. Her heart moved with compassion. Ignoring her father's decree, she adopted the child as her own. The child who was meant to die was raised in the house of the man who ordered his death. That paradox lies at the core of Moses' origin. He grew up between two worlds. On one side, the splendor of Egypt, education, wealth, hieroglyphic writing, military training, royal etiquette. On the other side, the blood of Israel, the covenant, the promise, the identity of a people who belonged not to kings, but to destiny. Everything he learned in Egypt would one day be used against Egypt. But for now, Moses was caught between identities, neither fully Egyptian nor fully Israelite. Time reshaped him. He grew into a young man, powerful and skilled. But the more he walked through Egypt's courts, the more he felt a silent fire burning inside him. He saw the oppression of his people. He saw Israelites forced into labor, beaten under the sun, pushed beyond human limits. He felt the tension of a man who knew he did not belong where he stood. One day, when he saw an Israelite being beaten by an Egyptian overseer, the conflict inside him erupted. He acted, and in a moment of rage and justice, the Egyptian slave master fell dead. Fear struck Moses' heart. He was neither praised by Israel nor protected by Egypt. He had violated the law, and Pharaoh issued a death order against him. For the second time in his life, Moses ran from Egypt. He fled into the wilderness, a harsh, unforgiving land of rock, sand, and silence. There, far from the golden pillars of Egypt, he lived as a shepherd. The man raised in luxury became a wanderer. The prince became an exile. The leader-to-be became a keeper of sheep. But this exile was not punishment. It was preparation. For 40 years, Moses walked the wilderness paths that the Israelites would one day travel. He learned every mountain, every valley, every water source. He learned patience, endurance, and humility. But destiny does not remain silent forever. One day, Moses wandered near a lonely mountain, a mountain shrouded in mystery. Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. There he saw something impossible, a bush engulfed in flames. But the fire did not consume it. The closer he stepped, the more the air burned with a presence older than the world itself. Then came the voice. "Moses, Moses." He answered with trembling fear. "Here am I." The voice said, "Remove your sandals. The ground you stand on is holy." This was not a Pharaoh calling him, not a priest, not a mortal king. This was the same voice that spoke to Abraham under the ancient stars, the same presence that formed the covenant, the same destiny that guided the tribes across centuries. Now that destiny spoke directly to Moses. "I have seen the suffering of my people. I have heard their cries. I will deliver them, and you will go to Pharaoh." Moses trembled. He argued. He doubted himself. "I am not a leader. I cannot speak well. Pharaoh will not listen." But destiny does not choose the powerful. It makes the chosen powerful. From the burning bush came the most important declaration in ancient history. "I am who I am," a name that carried the weight of eternity. And in that extraordinary moment, the path of Moses was sealed. The Exodus was about to begin, a confrontation between destiny and empire, between a shepherd and a throne. Everything that happened in Egypt had led to this moment. The Israelites were about to rise. Moses did not return to Egypt as the frightened fugitive who once fled into the desert. He returned as a man transformed, a man carrying a message from the ancient covenant, a man sent to confront the most powerful ruler on earth. When Moses stepped into Egypt once more, the air of the empire seemed different. He recognized the buildings, the markets, the smell of the Nile. But the boy who grew up in the palace was gone. In his place stood a shepherd with fire in his eyes and destiny burning in his heart. Beside him walked Aaron, his brother, the one chosen to speak on his behalf. Together they approached the throne of Pharaoh, the man who claimed to be a living God. "Let my people go," Moses declared, not as a request, not as a plea, but as a command from the one who carried the covenant. Pharaoh laughed. He saw before him two wandering Hebrews, standing against a throne carved from gold and guarded by armies. "Who is this God that I should obey him?" Pharaoh replied. It was the question that would tear Egypt apart. The signs, often called plagues, were not acts of random destruction. They were targeted strikes against Egypt's gods. Each sign challenged a deity the Egyptians trusted. The Nile turning to blood challenged Hapi, god of the river. The frogs that filled the land mocked Hecate, goddess of fertility. The darkness that covered Egypt challenged Ra, the sun god. The death of the firstborn struck at the heart of Egyptian royalty and identity. One by one, Egypt's gods fell silent as the covenant power rose. But Pharaoh's heart stiffened. The empire refused to bow, so the signs continued, each one heavier than the last, each one reminding Egypt that it did not control the destiny of the Israelites. Between each sign, Moses returned to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And each time Pharaoh refused, blinded by pride, blinded by power, blinded by fear. Egypt trembled. The Nile stank. Animals died. Storms raged. Hail fell like fire. Darkness swallowed the land. Still, Pharaoh would not yield. Then came the night that changed everything. The Israelites prepared a final ritual, a meal that would mark the beginning of their new identity. They were instructed to mark their doorways with the blood of a lamb. This symbol became the dividing line between life and death. That night, a wave of judgment passed over Egypt. The firstborn of every household that did not bear the mark fell into silence. From Pharaoh's palace to the smallest hut along the Nile, mourning rose like smoke into the night. Egypt, the empire of stone, armies, and gods, was broken. Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron in the darkness. "Go," he said, his voice trembling with grief. "Take your people and leave Egypt." The Israelites had waited 400 years for that moment. A nation of slaves was about to become a people of destiny. The Exodus began at dawn. Hundreds of thousands of Israelites, men, women, children, elders, gathered their belongings, took their animals, and marched out of Egypt. It was not a secret escape. It was a public declaration. The covenant people walked out of the empire that once tried to break them. But their journey did not end with their exit. Pharaoh, driven by rage and humiliation, changed his mind. He gathered his chariots, the most feared military force of the ancient world, and pursued the Israelites into the wilderness. The Israelites, trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, felt fear wash over them like the waves behind them. "Why did you bring us here to die?" they cried to Moses. Moses raised his staff toward the heavens and said, "Fear not. Stand still and see the salvation that will come." Then the impossible happened. The sea split. Walls of water rose on both sides, and a path opened before the Israelites. The ground beneath their feet dried, as if touched by divine wind. They walked between towering walls of water. As Egypt thundered behind them, the chariots entered the sea path. The wheels sank. The soldiers struggled. The waters trembled. When the last Israelites stepped onto the opposite shore, the sea crashed back into place. Pharaoh's army vanished beneath the roaring waves. The empire that enslaved them had fallen before their eyes. The Israelites stood on the shore, the morning sunlight breaking across the horizon. They were free, not by power, not by armies, but by destiny. The Exodus became the moment that defined them, a moment remembered for thousands of years, as proof that no empire could stop a people chosen for a purpose. From this moment forward, the Israelites were not just a family or a tribe. They were a nation, and their journey, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, had only just begun. Freedom is never the end of a story. It is the beginning of responsibility. When the Israelites stepped onto the far shore of the Red Sea, a sound filled the desert, the sound of hundreds of thousands singing with relief, with awe, with the overwhelming realization that they were no longer slaves. But the wilderness stretched before them like a vast, unfinished prophecy. They had escaped Egypt, but they had not yet become a nation. Freedom requires identity. Identity requires revelation. Revelation requires transformation. So the wilderness became their teacher. The Israelites journeyed through barren landscapes, guided by a mysterious presence that appeared in two forms. A pillar of cloud by day, towering, shimmering, impossible to explain, and a pillar of fire by night, a burning column that illuminated the darkness, like a torch held by heaven itself. Each step of their journey prepared them for something far greater. This was not a random path. It was a path of design. But freedom also brought challenges. At Marah, the water was bitter. At Rephidim, there was no water at all. In the desert of Sin, food was scarce. Fear spread quickly among the people. In Egypt, they worked under cruelty. But at least they knew what tomorrow held. Now they were free, but vulnerable. Moses cried out for guidance. And the same presence that split the sea began forming the Israelites into a new identity. Bread fell from the sky. Manna, white like frost, arriving each morning. Quail filled the camp at evening. Water sprang from rocks when Moses struck them with his staff. These acts were not simply miracles. They were lessons. Lessons that taught the Israelites to trust the one guiding them. Lessons that prepared them to receive something far more important. A law, a covenant, a national identity. But before that revelation could descend, another enemy rose to meet them in the desert. The Amalekites, a fierce and nomadic tribe that preyed upon the weak, striking the Israelites from behind. This was the first battle the Israelites fought as a free people. Joshua, young, courageous, untested, was chosen to lead the warriors. Moses stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield. As long as his hands were raised, the Israelites prevailed. When they fell, the Amalekites advanced. Aaron and Hur held Moses' arms high until the sun sank and victory was secured. The Israelites were learning something vital. They were no longer a group of slaves. They were a nation chosen to endure and chosen to prevail. But the greatest revelation was still to come. Weeks passed. Then the pillar of cloud descended upon a mountain so ancient that tribes feared to approach it. A mountain wrapped in silence until the moment heaven touched it. Mount Sinai, the place where the covenant would be renewed. The place where the Israelites would receive their law. The place where an entire nation would meet the presence that had guided their ancestors for generations. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning struck the peaks. A thick cloud descended like smoke from a furnace. The mountain trembled. The air seemed to burn with unseen power. The Israelites gathered at the base of the mountain, terrified yet compelled. And for the first time in human history, a nation heard the voice of the divine together. It was not a whisper, not a dream, not a vision given to a single prophet. It was a declaration that carved itself into the memory of a people. Moses ascended the trembling mountain, walking into the fire, the cloud, the thunder. There he received commands that would shape civilizations, influence law codes across cultures, and define morality for billions. The 10 words, the 10 commandments. These were not merely religious rules. These were the foundation of justice, identity, and purpose. They established how people should treat each other, how they should treat the divine, how they should live as a community. For a nation rising from slavery, this was the transformation they needed. Law gave them structure. Covenant gave them identity. Revelation gave them purpose. But during Moses' long journey up the mountain, the Israelites grew restless. The wilderness had tested them, but not yet perfected them. And in their fear and impatience, they returned to an old habit, the worship of idols, a golden calf, a symbol of the world they thought they had left behind. Moses descended with the tablets in hand and witnessed the chaos below. His anger erupted. The stone tablets shattered. The people trembled. But this moment of failure did not destroy the covenant. It strengthened it. Moses returned up the mountain to receive the law again, this time carved by his own hands, but commanded by the same divine voice. The Israelites learned something profound. Identity is not formed by perfection, but by correction, repentance, and renewal. By the time they left Sinai, they were no longer just wanderers. They were a nation bound by law, guided by presence, prepared for destiny. Their journey through the wilderness would continue for years, but their identity as a people was now firmly established. From slaves to students, from wanderers to warriors, from a family to a nation, the Israelites were ready for the next chapter of their hidden truth, a chapter that would carry them to the borders of the promised land, where giants waited, kingdoms watched, and destiny called them forward. The Israelites left Mount Sinai as a nation transformed, a people bound by covenant, guided by law, and shaped by revelation. But destiny is never simple. Every promise brings opposition. Every calling meets resistance. Ahead of them lay a land spoken of for generations, a land flowing with abundance, a land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a land that was to be the home of the covenant people, the promised land. But destiny rarely gives gifts without challenge. Before entering the land, Moses selected 12 men, one from each tribe, and sent them to scout the territory. They crossed mountains, valleys, and fortified cities unknown to the Israelites. They saw fields of grain, vineyards stretching across hills, and rivers running through fertile valleys. The land was good, very good, but not empty. In the cities, they saw warriors unlike any they had ever faced. Tall men, fierce men, towering above the average soldier. Men whose size and strength became legendary. To the Israelites, they looked like giants. When the 12 spies returned after 40 days, their report split the nation. 10 of them spoke with trembling voices. The people are powerful. Their cities are fortified. We are like grasshoppers in their eyes. Fear spread through the camp, like wind stirring a desert storm. But 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, spoke differently. The land is good. We are able to take it. We do not stand alone. Their confidence came not from strength, but from the covenant. But fear is a powerful force. It destroys courage. It blinds the heart. The Israelites cried through the night, saying they wished they had died in Egypt, rather than face giants. Destiny stood before them, but fear almost sent them backward. So the wilderness became their teacher once again. Because of their fear, the Israelites would wander for 40 years, 1 year for every day the spies explored the land, not as punishment, but as preparation, for a generation who would be ready to inherit promise without fear. The wilderness years reshaped them. They learned discipline. They learned leadership. They learned unity. They learned to trust what they could not see. Joshua grew from a young warrior into a seasoned leader. Caleb's courage became a symbol of faithfulness. The older generation slowly passed away, and a new generation, born in freedom, raised under the covenant, took their place. When the 40 years ended, the pillar of cloud and fire moved once more. It led them to the edge of the promised land, to the Jordan River. The same presence that split the Red Sea was about to open another path. Moses, now elderly, looked across the river and saw the land he had led his people toward for decades. He would not enter it, but his eyes witnessed the promise fulfilled. Before he died, Moses laid his hands on Joshua, passing leadership to the man who had carried courage when others carried fear. The Israelites mourned Moses for 30 days, and then destiny called them forward. Joshua stood before the tribes as the new leader of Israel. His first task was impossible, crossing the Jordan River at the peak of flood season. But when the priests carrying the ark stepped into the water, the river stopped flowing. Its rushing current froze in place. As if time itself paused, the Israelites crossed on dry ground, just as they had at the sea. The moment their feet touched the soil of the land promised to their ancestors, everything changed. Jericho, one of the strongest fortified cities in Canaan, stood before them. Thick walls, tall towers, warriors ready for battle. But the Israelites did not raise their weapons. Instead, they marched around the city, once a day for 6 days, in complete silence. On the 7th day, they marched 7 times. Trumpets blew, shouts rose, and the walls crumbled, not by force, not by siege, but by destiny. The land that once frightened them began to open before them, not through strength alone, but through unity and faith. But the land was still filled with challenges. Canaanite kings united against Israel. Battles spread across mountains and valleys. Tribes took possession of their territories. Cities were rebuilt. Borders were formed. This was not a simple invasion. It was a transformation. A wandering people became landowners. A loose collection of tribes became a nation. A promise spoken to Abraham became a reality under Joshua. When the land was finally divided among the 12 tribes, Israel stood as a nation with structure, identity, and purpose. A people shaped by covenant, forged in the wilderness, and strengthened by destiny. But their story was far from over. Ahead lay judges, kings, prophets, temples, exiles, returns, and revelations, each chapter revealing a deeper layer of the hidden truth behind the Israelites. And every step they took would shape the ancient world in ways that echo into the present. Their next era would not be led by warriors, but by judges, leaders raised at critical moments, to guide a nation struggling to remain faithful to the calling that had defined them since Abraham heard the first whisper under the stars. The promised land was theirs. The tribes had settled in their territories. The covenant people finally lived in the land sworn to Abraham centuries earlier. But the story of destiny does not stop when a promise is fulfilled. It begins a new chapter. Israel had no king, no central government, no palace, no throne. Each tribe lived in its own region. They shared the same God, the same law, the same history. Yet they were a nation without a single earthly ruler. In this fragile period, Israel faced challenges unlike any they had encountered in the wilderness. Without a king, who would lead them in crisis? Who would unite the tribes when enemies attacked? Who would remind them of the covenant? The answer came in a form the ancient world did not expect. Judges, not kings, not emperors, not generals. Judges were men and women raised by destiny, at critical moments, to rescue, guide, and restore Israel. Each judge had a different story, but all were called through extraordinary circumstances. The first great test came from the Canaanite kingdoms that still remained in the land. One such kingdom, led by a powerful commander named Sisera, oppressed Israel with iron chariots, the tanks of the ancient world. The Israelites cried out for help, and destiny answered through a woman named Deborah. Deborah was not a warrior. She was a prophetess, a woman of insight and wisdom. Under a palm tree, she gave judgment and guidance to the tribes. But when Sisera's army rose against Israel, Deborah summoned a commander named Barak and delivered a message. Go, for the Lord will deliver the enemy into your hand. Barak hesitated, but Deborah's certainty strengthened him. The battle took place at the Kishon River. Storms turned the ground to mud. Sisera's iron chariots became useless. The Israelites advanced. Sisera fled on foot and fell into the hands of a woman named Jael, whose unexpected courage ended the campaign. Deborah's leadership marked the rise of Israel's first heroic judge, showing the nation that destiny did not depend on strength alone. But the land had more enemies. The Midianites, desert raiders known for swift attacks, invaded Israel year after year, stealing crops, destroying fields, crushing hope. The Israelites hid in caves and begged for deliverance. Destiny responded again, this time through a man who doubted himself deeply. Gideon. When we meet Gideon, he is hiding at the bottom of a winepress, secretly threshing wheat, so the Midianites would not steal it. He saw himself as insignificant, but destiny saw him differently. An angel appeared beneath an oak tree and said, "Rise, mighty warrior." Gideon looked around, certain the greeting was meant for someone else. But he was chosen. Gideon tested the calling again and again. A fleece wet with dew, then dry, then another sign, and another. And each time, destiny confirmed the choice. When Gideon finally rose to fight, his army was too large, too normal, too predictable. Destiny required something impossible. So Gideon's army was reduced from thousands to just 300 men, with torches hidden inside jars and trumpets in their hands. They descended the hills. When the jars broke and the lights burst into view, the Midianite camp panicked, turning on itself. Israel won a victory that made Gideon one of their greatest judges. But the era of the judges was not only filled with triumph, it was filled with chaos. Each tribe faced its own struggles, raiders, rival kingdoms, internal disputes. And again, the same pattern repeated. Israel grew comfortable, forgot the covenant, fell into corruption, fell under enemy power, cried out, and destiny raised another judge. Samson was one such judge, a man with extraordinary strength, set apart from birth with a vow. His feats were legendary, yet his battles were personal, and his destiny tragic. But his story, like the others, reflected the greater truth. When Israel remembered the covenant, they prospered. When they forgot it, they fell. The era of judges shaped the nation through cycles of struggle and deliverance. But destiny was moving toward something else, something greater, something more permanent, a king. The tribes looked at the nations around them, the Canaanites, the Moabites, the Philistines, all with kings, armies, thrones, and centralized power. Israel felt vulnerable. They wanted unity. They wanted security. They wanted a visible leader. So the tribes came to Samuel, the final judge, a prophet, and the bridge between eras, and said, "Give us a king." It was a request that sent shockwaves through the nation. Why would a people guided directly by the divine desire a human king? Why choose a throne over a covenant? Samuel warned them, "You will be taxed. Your sons will fight wars. Your daughters will serve the palace. A king will take and rule with power." But the tribes insisted, "Give us a king like the other nations." So destiny allowed it. Israel's next chapter would be written, not by judges, but by kings. Kings who would rise to greatness. Kings who would fall into ruin. Kings who would shape history in ways the tribes could not imagine. The stage was set for one of the most complex eras in Israel's long and hidden history. The era of the monarchy was about to begin. The era of judges had shaped Israel through cycles of chaos and deliverance. But now, the tribes longed for something the surrounding nations possessed: a throne, a crown, a king. Samuel warned them of the cost. He told them that kings would take their sons for war, their daughters for service, their lands for tribute. He told them that earthly power always comes with a price. Yet the people insisted, "We want a king to judge us, and to go out before us, and fight our battles." So destiny shifted once again. Samuel, the last judge and a prophet of immense influence, was chosen to anoint Israel's first king, a young man named Saul. Saul was everything a king was expected to be: tall, strong, noble, broad-shouldered. His appearance alone stirred pride among the tribes. But destiny does not measure greatness by height or armor. Saul began his reign with promise. He led Israel in battle against their enemies. and united the tribes with early victories. Yet something in him was fragile. A restlessness, a fear of human opinion, a tendency to act before thinking. Saul struggled to listen to the voice that guided Israel for generations. His heart drifted from the covenant, and each choice he made pulled him further from the destiny he was meant to carry. The final break came when Saul disobeyed a direct instruction from Samuel. In the ancient world, kings acted with full authority, but Israel's king was meant to be different. He was meant to obey the divine, not replace it. Samuel confronted Saul with words that shook the kingdom. Obedience is greater than sacrifice. And destiny shifted again. The kingdom would be taken from Saul and given to another, someone unexpected, someone chosen not by appearance, but by heart. Far from the palaces and battlefields, in a small town named Bethlehem, a young shepherd watched over his family's flock. His name was David. He was the youngest son in his family, overlooked, dismissed, not considered important enough to even be present when Samuel visited their home. But destiny sees what others ignore. Samuel asked to see all the sons of Jesse. When David finally appeared, dust on his clothes, harp slung across his shoulder, eyes bright with a quiet courage, Samuel knew. The Lord looks at the heart, he said. Samuel anointed David with oil, and from that moment on, the spirit of destiny rested on him. Yet David did not become king immediately. His rise would come through danger, hardship, and victories that echoed through history. David's first great moment came when he faced a giant named Goliath. Goliath towered over Israel's soldiers, a fearsome warrior from the Philistines, a man who stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in bronze armor, carrying weapons the Israelites had never seen. Day after day, he mocked Israel and challenged anyone to fight him. No one moved. Not Saul, not his generals, not his strongest warriors. But the shepherd boy stepped forward, armed not with a sword, but with a sling, armed not with armor, but with courage, armed not with fear, but with faith. The stone flew, the giant fell, and David's name spread across Israel like wildfire. But greatness attracts jealousy. Saul saw the people praise David, and the king's heart twisted with fear and envy. David became a fugitive, hunted by the man whose throne he was destined to inherit. He fled to deserts, caves, and wilderness strongholds. Men gathered around him, the broken, the outcasts, the desperate, and together, they became a force Saul could never defeat. Yet David refused to kill Saul, even when he had the chance. I will not lift my hand against the king, he said. Destiny would place him on the throne, but he would not seize it through bloodshed. Saul's story ended in tragedy, fallen on the battlefield, his sons beside him, his kingdom in ruins. Israel mourned deeply. The era of its first king had come to a devastating close. After Saul's death, David was anointed king of Judah, and later of all Israel. His reign marked the rise of Israel's greatest golden age. He conquered Jerusalem and made it the capital of the kingdom. He expanded Israel's borders. He organized armies, united tribes, and brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city. With music, dancing, and celebration, Jerusalem became more than a city. It became a symbol, a home for destiny, a center of worship, a place where the covenant met the kingdom. Yet David's life was not without failure. He made mistakes, faced consequences, wept for lost sons, and battled with grief. His story teaches that even the greatest kings struggle with human weakness, but his greatness lay not in perfection, but in repentance. He returned to the covenant again and again. As David's reign matured, Israel entered an era of unmatched unity. Foreign nations respected them, enemies feared them, prophets honored them, and the people thrived under a king who understood both power and humility. But David's destiny held one more purpose, laying the foundation for the next king, his son Solomon. Where David fought wars and conquered territories, Solomon would build a kingdom of wisdom and peace. Where David prepared materials, Solomon would build a temple. Unlike anything the ancient world had seen, the throne of Israel was now firmly established, and the covenant was deeply woven into the identity of the nation. But the golden age did not last forever. Solomon rose to power with wisdom beyond his years. Kings and queens traveled from distant lands to hear his counsel and witness the wealth of Israel. He built the first temple, a structure of gold, cedar, stone, and reverence. Its walls gleamed. Its inner sanctum held the Ark of the Covenant. Its design symbolized heaven meeting earth. For a time, Israel flourished in wealth, peace, and wisdom. But over the years, Solomon's heart drifted. Foreign alliances, wealth, and distractions weakened his devotion. The kingdom grew powerful, but fragile. When Solomon died, Israel faced its greatest internal crisis yet. The kingdom would split. Brothers would turn against brothers. Tribes would fracture. And the throne established by David would be shaken to its core. The unity that began with Samuel's anointing would end with division. And Israel's destiny would take a darker, more complex turn. The golden age of David and Solomon shone brightly, but even the brightest flame can cast long shadows. When Solomon died, the kingdom he built, wealthy, admired, and powerful, stood on the edge of transformation. Behind the beauty of the temple, behind the wealth of the palace, behind the wisdom of the throne, cracks had begun to form. Heavy taxes, forced labor, growing tension among the tribes. Under the surface, Israel's unity was fragile. Now destiny shifted again, and what followed would shape the entire future of the Israelites. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, ascended the throne. He inherited wealth, power, and influence, but he did not inherit Solomon's wisdom. The tribes came to him with a simple request. Your father placed a heavy burden on us. Lighten the load, and we will serve you forever. Rehoboam consulted two groups, the elders who understood the people, and the young advisors who understood only privilege. The elders said, if you serve them today, they will always be loyal. But the young advisors urged harshness. Rehoboam chose pride over wisdom, force over compassion. He told the tribes, my father disciplined you with whips. I will discipline you with scorpions. That single decision did what no foreign empire had ever achieved. It split the kingdom in two, Israel in the north, Judah in the south, a divided nation, a divided identity, a fracture that shaped the destiny of every generation that followed. And yet, even in this moment of division, the true message of the Israelite story becomes clear. Empires rise and fall, kings succeed and fail, wars break nations, decisions divide people, but identity endures. From Abraham to Joseph, from Moses to Joshua, from David to Solomon, from exile to return, from unity to division, the Israelites carried something far stronger than thrones, borders, or monuments. They carried memory. They carried covenant. They carried destiny. And even when the kingdom broke, their identity did not. The fall of the united monarchy did not end their story. It began the next chapter of it, a chapter that survived Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, a chapter that stretched across deserts, continents, and centuries, a chapter that no empire could erase. Rehoboam's choice shattered a kingdom, but it could not shatter the people, because the true strength of Israel was never in the throne, never in the palace, never in the walls of Jerusalem. The true strength was in the story they carried, generation after generation, a story that outlived empires, a story that survived exile, a story that still whispers through history. And that story now ends here, not with the fall of a king, but with the survival of a people whose identity could not be conquered, a people whose memory could not be erased, a people whose destiny could not be broken. This is the hidden truth behind their journey. This is the legacy of the Israelites. This is the whisper of history that continues to echo across the world. The kingdom may have fallen, but the story lived on.